So now that you're understanding and kind of feeling into the process here, we're going to move on to B and the B group. And this is the information, education, and training sets of strategies. And here we had pretty good levels of support for these ideas that came up. And you can see again in the green, these are the folks who voted 1 yes, full support for this idea. And again, in the purple and orange down here would be the 5s and 6s. So you can see it blips up on B5 and on B4. So we'll talk a little bit, and I know there were some language issues in some of these as well. So this is what it looks like. They all ended up in the green category, meaning there was less than 20% of folks.
Hey Lou, I'm sorry, but if you could just start your slideshow on this, we'd be able to see it better. We're just seeing your PowerPoint screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay.
I'll just zoom it in a bit.
Thank you. All right, there you go. That better? Okay. So those are the scores. And as I was pointing out, these little purple and orange are the folks who were not happy with that recommendation or language. And this is just, and somebody had asked about ranking. We did, you might have noticed in the spreadsheet that we shared with you, we did create a mean score, meaning an average for all the scores. And this just represents which of the recommendations had the highest average score down to the lowest average score. So so that's an illustration of that. Any thoughts, comments before we talk about some wording changes that were suggested in the B group? Again, remember, this is education, training, information about etiquette, about usage, about penalties, opportunities for being more welcoming, for being more, giving more information. So I think we got a lot of comments about B4 and B5. I think there were some, that's why they're down at the bottom of this list about how, and you'll see some wording changes here for these two. Any just comments on the information, education, training before we?
I just want to acknowledge Amelia's comment in the chat, which kind of gets to crux of a lot of problems, is the question of education versus trail development and design versus enforcement, and the relative costs of each of those things, and what sort of trail experience do we want to have, and where do we put our resources in terms of putting resources towards education, putting resources towards trail development, or putting resources towards enforcement. So I just kind of put that out there, that I think Amelia raises a good question about the choices that we have to make as a government agency, because we can't necessarily solve everything.
Right. I think this was one area where we had talked during the meetings about the role of the user groups and the trail users themselves to support, augment, volunteer, time and energy to fill in where district resources are short. So conducting education and trainings of different user groups might be useful there. All right, well, let's do the wording changes real quickly, unless there are some other hands up.
Okay, I will go ahead and launch the poll.
Okay. And Austin has a question in the chat when we have a chance. Okay, so as I mentioned, there was some suggestions for better language for B4, which is expose people to a variety of park environments. I'm gonna stop sharing, we don't need that. And the optional language is provide opportunities for people to experience a variety of park environments. And I think the way it related to trails was wanting to make sure that different user groups had different access to different experiences.
Yeah, and that was also a PAC rep comment. It was just exposed people sounded, I don't know. We just thought this was a little bit nice. It just sounded like more polished wording. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's fair. And number B is by far and away the leader there. So I'm going to go ahead and end that and just share the results real quick.
Okay.
And I do see Austin's question in the chat. And I'll just, I can't obviously answer that directly. I think, but I think it's a good question, and that is part of the reason why the Trail User Working Group had formed, was just sort of a recognition that kind of I guess the definition of insanity, but kind of continuing to push forward park projects and being faced with opposition and trying to find a way to work together in a way that we're making the best use of public funds. So I'll just say that has been a challenge. So anyways, going on to poll B5. So we'll launch this one.
Okay, another one that suffered from a little bit of maybe not enough detail. Two options to the original language was allow for new trail users to have a learning curve. One option, provide new trail users with educational resources to promote positive trail experiences. And another one, allow for new trail users to experience progressive challenges that provide opportunities suitable for those brand new to trail running, hiking, riding, to more experienced users. Adela?
Yeah, I mean, the alternatives kind of are different. So I'm wondering what was the intent of this one?
I believe the intent was to not penalize or to acknowledge that new trail users might need some time to accommodate to the experience of and the rules of the road, so to speak, I think. So just understand that people who are using these trails for the first time or early users might make some bad judgments or not be familiar with the rules. I think that's what the learning curve was. Yeah.
Actually, neither of those alternatives really explains that.
Right.
Some more work to be done on that, I guess.
Yeah, if you have a preference, please indicate. I do agree that there's a mixture of concepts going on in those three alternatives. So I would say, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I just saw Norman and now Scott have their hands up.
Yeah, go ahead, Norm, and then Scott.
Well, yeah, I think Adele's point is good. And also that one suggested change, suggests that there would be some kind of progression of exciting different alternatives that, could result in building all kinds of bicycle trail experiences that I documented in our presentation, which would be totally inimical to the park district. I don't think that's what's being proposed, but it just implies that. And then secondly, just to go back to the comment about threats of legal litigation over CEQA, if the park district does CEQA properly, there's no legal threat. So, and anybody has a right to challenge if they feel any agency is not doing what it should do under the California Environmental Quality Act. And that's a principle that's enshrined in the statute itself, that people need to understand what are the impacts, what are the mitigations, and decision makers make a decision based on a full analysis of that. That's just, to me, that's John Muir and Redwoods. So I really take umbrage at the implication that there's something wrong with people who challenge challenge EIRs or negative declarations.
Okay. All right, thank you, Norm. All right, Scott?
It sounded like the intent of this question was to ask users to be more tolerant of other users.
Kind of, yeah, that's the essence, I think, of it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we can.
I see Luana's hand is up as well.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Luana.
I had actually was one of the people who commented on this question, and I provided the wording for B. My thought behind it was just it just sounded really negative towards new users. Like the new users need a learning curve, where I feel like all users need a learning curve. So I just wanted to, just as far as when we think about new users, how do we provide that type of positive environment? Because it's not just the new users that have that learning curve. I think some of the existing users during this pandemic needed to have a learning curve about new users and how do you just kind of interact. And so, yeah, I just felt that it was problematic and you put new users in a negative light. And then a lot of times folks who think new users who need learning curves aren't necessarily new users. So I think sometimes there's people view certain groups as being new users to the parks when they're not. So I just had issues with that question and just I wanted to frame it positively.
Great. Yeah. Really good. Okay.
Great. Okay, so share the results there real quick. So the winner with 69% provide new trail users with educational resources and positive trail experiences.
Right.
Okay,
on to the next.
On to the next, B7.
Okay, this is a fairly straightforward change. The way it originally was written, educate users about impacts of trail usage on natural resource habitats. And I think the correction to that language was educate users about impacts of trail usage on natural resources and habitats. So there are, yeah, you can see the difference. Just based on the speed of reply, that sounds like that seems like that was an easy one.
Looks like that's kind of a no-brainer. Most people clearly support the second. So we'll keep moving on to B8.
Okay. Provide clear, easy to find information on park and trail access, including transit, in a variety of formats and make improvements to allow easier location of parks and trails for transit purposes. The proposed change is providing clear, easy to find information on park and trail access, including transit, in a variety of formats, and make improvements to allow easier access to parks and trails for transit purposes. So again, a little bit of a subtle change. The original language had easier location of, and I think this came from, helping folks navigate to the trailheads. And so
this was also a PAC suggested edit again. Just it seemed like we wouldn't locate parks and trails. We wouldn't select locations of parks and trails to be near transit. We want transit access to parks and trails. So that was what we were getting at.
Thank you for that clarification. Good. Okay.
That seems far and away the winner with item B as well.
Yeah, I think just one more here, I think.
Okay, very good.
Develop consistent symbology for specific user types on maps and signage as the original language, and then just develop consistent symbology on maps and signage. I think this, this grew out of a complaint that there could be a little better clarity on maps and signage just overall. And
Yeah, I think, again, a Pat comment. I think it was referring to that triangle sign that has the different users.
yes,
But, when it says the language of the initial said for symbology for specific user types, it either should say identifying specific user types, but actually we suggested B as being just simpler and more straightforward.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think we've got most everybody on that. So it looks like just develop consistent symbology on maps and signage has 70% of the vote there.
Great. Okay.
Okay, great. So that's the end of the B series.
Excellent. All right. I'm just looking whether or not to take a break now or after the C series. So just evaluating that idea. Let me just suggest we go on real quickly with C, if everybody's okay with that. And I'll share my screen again. And we will move on into, looks like there are about 5 wording changes for this one. And we will take a break after this set. Okay. With C, we had a lot more variability in support levels. So you can see the greens are still there, but several of them got less than 50% of a 1 strong support. So remember, 1 through 4 is different levels of moving the recommendations forward, and purple and orange are not. So you can see a little bit more variability here in levels of support. And then again, we ranked these in order of the average score, and C11 came up on top. C1 was in the middle, had a little bit of medium range of opposition, and then several of these had, greater than 25% opposition. And I think now that I've opened this, I know that there's going to be a lot of discussion about these. These are the management strategies, by the way. So in a sense, management strategies represent, since part of the reason for this group was to try to come up with ideas for managing conflict, trail user conflict. I think it's not surprising that there might be a lot of interest in the management strategies. So in other words, out there on the trail, how are things being managed to optimize experience and minimize conflicts? So before we dive into these, Austin, do you want to just give an overall comment?
Thanks, Lou. Yeah, I think this set of questions speaks to my biggest concern with really the outcomes of this process. I mean, what this set of responses says to me is that there's a number of people here that don't want to try anything new and aren't interested in looking at other jurisdictions to see how they've addressed the situation. And so I find the findings here really problematic and indicative of some of the Trail User Working Group's members' unwillingness to explore new ways to address the situation. And I'm frustrated.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. All right. And I think that, as we unpack some of these, and again, I know that you don't have the benefit of seeing all of the comments that were presented, and I think that will be somewhat illustrative for you as we distribute these. But I encourage folks to speak up as we get into these so that we can share our thoughts and reasons for some of this opposition or lack of support. So I understand your concerns, and I think that's one of the things we wanted to accomplish today was understanding from each other's perspectives, why are these controversial or why are these difficult for some? And All right, so let's, any other just general comments about this? As you see, there's yeah, Simone?
Well, I guess I put it in the chat, but I wanted to see, before I spoke too soon, and with Jim, I feel like I did speak too soon and not hearing people's concerns over wording and lack of clarity. But, clearly as the Bay Area Ridge Trail representative, I'm really disheartened to see that prioritizing connectivity for all different uses and, looking at different regional trail efforts. So that includes the Bay Trail would be something that, kind of was in the opposition. And so I guess I was hoping that maybe someone could speak to that. And if we could address those concerns. It's the primary element of my job is trying to connect these spaces. And I think that it's a really valuable, resource to residents. And the East Bay is the area in the entire Bay Area where we have the least amount of connectivity for cyclists, for example. And that's a lot of the reason why I've been here sitting on this group. And so I guess I would like to hear if anyone could speak to it.
Okay. Let's see, I think Norman, you have your hand up next, and then Adele.
Sure. So I was just going to comment that in what not Simone's comment, but the comment before that.
Okay.
This set of issues really is something that would require at least 2 to 3 sessions of us discussing this among ourselves. This is really the heart of the whole issue here. And I don't think we can do it service in a 15-minute discussion here today. And I had hoped originally that we would focus on basically these kinds of issues here in this working group in greater detail, and in a group of meetings on this because, and the other, secondly, the way certain things are phrased, there's a difficulty in trying to analyze these and answer them without knowing, as Jim has stated at the beginning, what the various implications are of what you're talking about. So to talk about the connectivity of regional trails, that's fine to say as a general principle, but when people who want to connect regional trails want to connect trails through areas that are considered very important for habitat and wildlife, and that somehow think that that's okay when the habitat and wildlife values are very, very important, and we're dealing with endangered species, plants and animals, then, okay, what does it mean to say prioritize connectivity? I'm not going to prioritize connectivity in that situation because of the wildlife and habitat values. So there needs to be a lot more fleshing out of what we're talking about here.
Okay. Thank you for that rationale. Yeah, Adele, and then Jim, or Linus, and then Jim.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Norman. I think I agree with what Norman said. I think that these need more discussion. And again, just to summarize these things in very simple one-line recommendations or strategies, I think there's the opportunity for a lot of different interpretations of some of them. So we really need to discuss them. And, just one of the overall comments that the PAC representatives have was that the way they were written, they seem to be heavily focused on bicyclists. And, we need to address all users and frame things in a positive aspect so that it's positive things to move forward with. Anyway, so would appreciate definitely more discussion within this, amongst everyone in the group on these.
Right, great. Okay, Linus, that brings us to you, and happy to see you.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Yeah, and so I'm sort of coming out of hiding here, lurking on the edge for Simone's comment, and just in support. So we're all subject to CEQA. We're all subject to the kind of scrutiny that we always bring to some project and concern for habitat. The Park District's primary mission is not the same as some others. Public recreation is a leading edge issue. There are such things as refuge properties that are more significantly impacted by public trails and so forth. But the idea that it can't be done and held in balance is, I think, just promotes this polemic that puts anybody that's managing open space in immediate violation for folks going there anyway. So the strategy here is public education, I believe, and the encouragement of knowledge so that people understand the resource and how to treat it versus enforcement of keeping people out. It's almost an impossibility to do so. That said, we do it very respectfully. I'm a little put off with the challenge that somehow there's a person in this whole mix that doesn't have some deep measure of respect for natural resources. I think everybody here is very concerned about that. That's why we're here. That's why we're spending so much time talking about it. But it's to figure out a way forward. And to the degree that, you know, the rubber meets the road or whatever, again, I've sent out, we've got a property adjacent to Fernandez Ranch that now will provide for equestrians right off of Highway 4, no longer a Christie Road, bicyclists, walkers, ADA, and so forth. And it's all about it being contiguous to 1,185 acres and then out into the Pinot Valley watershed and so forth. And each parcel is different in its way. Some are much more user specific, some are much more refuge, and connectivity allows for different experiences along your way. So it's incumbent upon us to continue to face this. Sorry, I'm very worried about this, but it's part of the process to bring this balance to bear because people are going there anyway. How do we help them do it safely and with good knowledge as to how to steward the resource for future generations?
Sorry, I was muted. All right, thank you so much, Linus. I appreciate that. And then Jim and Luana, and I think we should move into.
I do also see Amelia's hand after Luana.
Thank you. Jim.
So thanks, Simone. I, thinking a lot about this, these are difficult. And I think what we use as our guidelines and our lodestars and what we do about that. So just cutting to the chase, I think the user experience and the protection of the environment are the first things in planning. And I described that in the presentation. And there are really tricky situations like during the East Bay mud discussions, there was a desire to add mountain bikes to a narrow trail, the Skyline Trail, which not only has a lot of plant diversity and habitat values, but it was also a lot of corners that you couldn't see around, steep. And the only other option was to continue what's happened for a long time, which is at that point, people had to go on a Skyline to connect to another part of the trail. So some of these are just really tough. I don't know any way around it other than people who were on the trail, and I've walked it, not knowing what was coming around the corner, and there have been some near misses. It just wasn't safe for either bikers or walkers, people who are walking, people with families and so forth. So that's where I have to put the user experience and the environment as the first thing to consider in planning. And then connectivity is definitely a factor. But there's some situations where it just gets tougher. So I just wanted to explain a specific on that particular point. But thank you for bringing it up.
Right. Okay, Luana, and then.
So I have two different comments, and one just to reply to the East Bay MUD's master plan. We let Skyline Gardens hijack bike access to the entire area instead of looking at each different section of that land and seeing which areas you could have multi-use access and not, because I agree Skyline Gardens is more problematic, but the Pinole watershed, that area wasn't problematic at all. And it was obvious in those discussions that people were advocating for different lands when they had never actually walked and hiked that trail. But just as far as overall in the Bay Area, we have the Bay Trail, we have the Water Trail, we have the Bay Area Ridge Trail. And all of these trails, the community is behind. People are interested in having more access. And if we look at the Ridge Trail is extremely, just as far as looking at each piece of area and seeing how do we provide access and respect the area. So if you look at the SFPUC watershed, we have docent tours. We have some areas that are part of the trail that we only open up once or twice a year. So it's not saying that we're providing a free for all access through all the trail, but we do as far as recognize that some areas are highly sensitive, and there has to be just as far as a different interaction between the public's access to that and the actual land. So it's not saying that everything is open 100% to hiking, to everyone, or to biking. And then just as far as connectivity, if we look at HARD has been working on a master plan for trails, and there's a proposed San Lorenzo Creek Way that provides access and connectivity for low-income communities to safely as far as ride along a San Lorenzo Creek and go all the way from the Bay Trail to the Ridge Trail and into the East Bay Regional Park lands. So just as far as connectivity is something that is so important. If we look at connectivity, when you're able to connect different lower land trails, you're giving some communities, as far as where I live, greater access to the Bay Area Ridge Trail or greater access to East Bay Regional Parks, because you're connecting our kind of lower land areas. So I think we really have to look at it. And then if we look at the East Bay Regional Park and William Penn Mott, William Penn Mott, as far as that idea of trails and connectivity, he took it from East Bay Regional Parks to the state parks to just as far as the national parks. So there's a rich history of working for as far as connectivity in this area. And I think just as far as when we see connectivity and multi-use, we're not saying that over protection of lands. We're trying to figure out how can we do it in a way where we're providing access, but also protecting those resources. So we need to start looking at intersectionality of a lot of these issues. But I just don't understand why people are just so against connectivity. It's appalling because it's not what the common folk want.
All right. Thank you, Luana. I see Mimi and then Morris. Morris, you'll be up after Mimi. Go ahead.
I've decided that I've just about answered the entire questionnaire the wrong way. The only reason that I put connectivity lower was I prioritized. It said, I don't prioritize connectivity. I want the park district to find out of this group the highest things we're most concerned about. It's not, nobody in this group is against connectivity. In some ways, you could have answered one to almost every single question on all four. So it's not a matter, maybe I'm the only one who sort of prioritized it. But the prioritized word in this one made me put it lower because I thought that is not the highest responsibility of East Bay Regional Park District.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, the wording influenced you. Yeah, got it. Okay, Morris, you're our last commenter for this section, and we're going to move on to the voting. So thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just think that prioritize means in this context, and in all contexts, that this is an aspect that has to be considered and should not be forgotten. And, you know, we have prioritized from the first question through the last question, we're prioritizing the environment and natural resource and protections, and justly so. But we also want to say that to the extent that, you know, the East Bay Regional Park District is part of a greater network of trails and greater network of parks all around the Bay Area, that connectivity is also a priority. It doesn't mean it trumps all other priorities to say it's a priority. It means that it's an important factor. For example, I went to a Bay Area open space conference a few years ago, and somebody asked somebody from Mid-Peninsula Open Space District, I think, or Santa Clara County Parks, what priorities do you have when you acquire new land? And early on in the Ridge Trail, they worked with the master planners and trail planners of each county to get the Ridge Trail into the county plans. And the representative of that agency, when asked that question, said, one of the things we first look at is it on the route of the Bay Area Ridge Trail? If it is, then that's a point in its favor. And we want to acquire that land if possible, all of the things being equal, or, you know, there being no reason not to acquire that land. In this context, we're just saying that it's important to consider. It's important to consider regional trails and the parks that are next to the East Bay Regional Park District when we decide what kind of trails we're going to have and where they go and what they do. Providing a multi-day experience, providing a multi-park experience, having maps that show these connections is important, because in fact, when you go out and hike in a number of places, you're going from out of the district and into the district, from Joaquin Miller to, you know, to East Bay Regional, from Diablo Foothills to Shell Ridge to Mount Diablo State Park. It has to be a priority that those things be considered. And again, it doesn't mean that it trumps all other priorities.
Okay, thanks, Morris. Kathy, I see your hand up too. And just as a word of like announcement real quickly, we're past our break time, as you may have noticed. And just based on, this is exactly the kind of dialogue that we were hoping for. I don't want to interrupt it. So my proposition would be, if you are desperately in need, or even not less than desperately in need of refreshment or a bathroom break, please avail yourself of it. We're just going to keep on going. So thanks, Kathy.
So my tendency as a hiker and as a member of the public would be to be in favor of connectivity. But I've found as a dog walker that usually when there's connectivity, it defaults to the highest level of control over dogs. And I think the most recent example of that is when the new area of Sibley that has an entrance in Canyon that was used informally by the people in the area for many, many years. Now that it's connected to Huckleberry, it defaults to, well, it doesn't default to Huckleberry, which has no dogs, but it defaults to dogs on leash. And there's multiple other examples like that. I think the whole New Deer Valley, where they somewhere in the future are hoping to have a trail that connects from Black Diamond Mines down all through the New Deer Valley and onto perhaps Los Vaqueros and March Creek State Park, it's probably going to default to probably no dogs or dogs on leash. So, I mean, I am in favor of connectivity, but I really hope that that does not mean that that the East Bay Parks relaxes its liberal allowance of dogs to the rules on dogs in the state park, for example.
Okay, great, Kathy, thank you. All right, well, great comments. I knew this section was going to generate a lot of conversation and thought. So why don't we take a look at some wording changes for these recommendations and see if we can get into those, and then our final set of ideas.
Okay, great. And we'll try to run through these fairly quickly. So we're on C1. Okay, I'm going to launch that. So yeah, look to other jurisdictions where there have been similar discussions for models of multi-use trail management, such as Bill's Trail, Samuel Taylor, John Muir Land Trust, Santa Cruz County, Napa County. I think most people are familiar. A lot of work's been done in Marin County, and Santa Clara and others.
Right. So the alternative was just to take off the references to those specific things. There's a feeling that maybe that wasn't a complete list, or it didn't really mean anything just to name those things without some explanation of what they represented. So, so that I think is the change that's proposed in as the B choice there.
And I'll chime in because again, that was a PAC recommendation. Again, we felt like it was not inclusive of all areas that we could be looking at. And there were some other areas that have been mentioned during discussion that were not in the list. And we just thought by making a little list like that, it was very limiting and that it should just be left open-ended.
I think most folks agreed, 82% choosing item B there.
Okay.
Stop sharing that and go on to C2.
Okay, discuss connectivity and interface with adjacent land managers. Well, the original wording had a slash in there, and I think the proposal was to be a little bit more specifically worded. Discuss connectivity and interfaces with adjacent land managers. So fairly simple edit there.
Yeah, it seems everybody's going straight to B, so everybody's okay with removing the slash. So we'll move on to C9.
Right. Balance access such that if bike access is expanded in some places, consider closing us elsewhere. And the proposed revision, balance access to trails for the various user groups throughout the park district. So,
and that was again a PAC suggestion because it was just so focused on bike access, and there may be, there are other types of uses that, and we just thought by making it a little bit more general, it was better.
Norman, do you want to speak to this? So you hand up.
Yeah, well, I think this goes to one of the issues that I had hoped we would talk about, which is if there may be occasions where if you're going to expand bike access, that it may be appropriate than in other locations to remove or restrict the access, depending upon the situation and the circumstances. That's really the heart of this question. Changing it really alters this question and the dynamic of it, and what one would want to look at completely different. So,
and actually, Norman, now that you stated that way, if it were stated that way, that would, yeah, it is again how we read it. It's a little bit yeah, again, it was very bicycle focused. And so yeah.
Yeah, well.
Are people having a hard time making a choice here, or did that help clarify for you? I believe that if you've voted, Amanda, maybe you can tell me if the polling works such that if you've voted and you want to change your mind, you can just select a different answer, or is it only accept one?
If you've already hit the submit button, then it's closed. We could always actually reopen that poll and retake it if people wanted to change their answer based off anybody's comments.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the other way to do it.
Great, Thank you. That's helpful to know. All right, I see a couple of other hands up before we move on from this one. I think this is the next to the last on this group. So Morris, I see you, and then Kathy.
Yeah, it seems to me that, there was a comment just a minute ago about connectivity and how it might affect dog walkers. And this question, which pertain to bicyclists, should apply, if you're going to balance access, thinking about, oh wait, I'm sorry, you're on to C9, never mind.
We're on C9, yes. Okay. All right, Kathy, I think you're up next.
Well, most of these questions have involved to just clarifying the wording, but the change there actually changes my answer and changes the entire interpretation of the question. Because if someone said to me, oh, do you want to balance access in the parks? I'd say, of course. And then if I like it better, more detailed. If they're talking about balancing access by reducing bicycle use in some places, then I'm entirely against it. I mean, not that I'm against, there might be some place where bicycle use needs to be curtailed because of erosion or something, but just in general, if we add some bicycle trails somewhere, I certainly don't want to make that necessitate removing bicycle trails elsewhere. So I'm not clear what I voted on. I voted for balancing access, but does that mean I'm against, I think it's
unclear. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. They're kind of different suggestions. Scott, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I think the original wording was kind of a zero-sum situation, stating that there's already plenty of bike access. And if you provide more bike access somewhere, then you must get rid of it elsewhere. So I mean, that's why I was opposing it with that type of wording.
Yeah.
I'll just comment that one, I do think that after decades of discussing this and trying to come up with solutions to trail conflict, that we shouldn't shy away from really getting specific about some things, and specifically talking about one user group if we need to. That's just a general comment. But I did want to also, not to complicate this one, but there are also trails out there that they're not on our maps. They were created by the public. Bikers may be using them or not. Those would be included, right? Like, I think in this, where we put in a trail here, let's make sure that we close and restore other areas. But I hope that didn't confuse anyone, but I just wanted to point that out.
And I guess just to further add to the confusion, but I just wanted to add on that Adela made the comment that some of the PAC's thoughts were this was focused on bike access, and I get it. It says bike access in there, but some of the discussion that we've been having among staff is, should we be looking at, if there is, whether it's dedicated bike trails or specific bike access, is that providing something for cyclists, but are you also providing something for hikers by then removing conflicts? So making trails that perhaps are experiencing conflicts safer, because you're now providing something that cyclists would use elsewhere. So I think that's been kind of the flavor there. So it's not just been to just expand bike access, but how do we make the hiking experience better?
Sounds like we need to take this one back for a little bit more work through. Norman, do you have one more comment, and then Adele and Morris back on this?
Yeah, this is not a zero-sum question in my mind. It's a question that says, okay, if we have expanded bike access, there may be locations where, due to user experience, problems with accidents, problems with enforcement on a trail that is already a bicycle trail, that trail may be appropriate to have that closed down. And we all know that once anybody gets access to anything, you have a constituent user group who doesn't want to see that lost. And all this is saying is we should consider again, as I said before, the circumstances involved, but that may be an appropriate solution to say a trail user conflict problem that exists, and that needs to be considered. That's all.
Great, thank you. Adele, and then Morris.
And I think Norman stated that very, very well. I like that. It doesn't mean you open a trail for one user, you have to close one elsewhere. It just gives the opportunity to balance and address conflicts or problems with existing. I like that.
Yes. Good. All right. Thank you. All right, Morris.
Yeah, I think there might be something to that if you were, say, talking about opening up a new trail in Redwood Park to bikes. Well, maybe there's another trail that one can substitute for. Where there is conflict, that might make sense in some instances. But when you're talking about opening up a new trail in Antioch and you have a conflict between bikes and horses or bikes and somebody in Briones, the two are completely unrelated. And we're talking about what our mission is to talk about trails in new parks that are now land bank properties that taxpayers voted on and paid for to be new parks. Opening up a new bike trail in a new park has absolutely nothing to do with the trails that exist in other parks and older established parks, unless maybe it's adjacent to an older established park. But as stated, it's like, all right, we're giving bikes a new trail in Antioch, so we should take one away from Crockett Hills. That doesn't make any sense at all.
Right. Good. And Simone had a suggestion in the chat as well to turn things around and say to balance access such that if access is closed in one area, it could be expanded in another. So,
Do we want to go on to C10 or?
Yeah, I think we should. So we'll have to take another look at C9, I think.
Yeah, but I think those are all. I think everybody actually made some good points on that end. So launch in C10.
Okay. So this is provide and protect equestrian access through designated trails, hiker horse only trails near stables. And just a little cleanup of the language, provide and protect equestrian access by designating hiker horse only trails near stables. So you have to look pretty closely to get the difference.
Okay,
But,
so I think pretty universal support for B.
Okay. I think, was that the last C?
That's the end of this. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Amanda mentioned there was one more. I got one more. Okay, so I'm going to launch this one. C14.
Conduct regularly scheduled environmental evaluations for monitoring and mitigating the impacts of intense recreational use on wildlife and native flora. That's the original language, and the proposed language. Conduct regularly scheduled environmental evaluations for monitoring and mitigating any unacceptable impacts of intense recreational use on wildlife and native flora. So, I don't know if the authors wanted to talk about that, or?
I think that was mine, and I was reacting to the obvious fact that there is an impact. If anybody even walks into a park, it's an impact. So what is okay impact and what is not? If the baseline has to be that we balance impact and access.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I was thinking.
Okay. Norman, and then Pam.
Well, I think unacceptable incorrectly or unfairly restricts what we want to look at, because there may be impacts that, however you want to define the term unacceptable, aren't unacceptable, but nevertheless are having an impact. And particularly if there are impacts over time that may result in a future unacceptable impact, then you would want to know that ahead of time so you can deal with it. The best example is the impact of carbon emissions on the atmosphere and the environment. I think that's why I would stick with the number one, the one already there, because unacceptable, I think, really adds a gloss to this that limits it in what we want to do.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm sharing the results there, pretty evenly split. And
yeah, Morris had his hand up too. Pam, okay. Did you put your hand down?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to remind all of us in the group that the term impact is not just a subjective opinion, but it actually has some defined properties as used by biologists and who apply the best available science. And the Park District has notable, excellent researchers who help identify impacts, applying those terms properly.
Thank you. All right, Morris, to you. Saw your hand up. You're still muted though. All right. Can you get your microphone on, Morris? We can't hear you. All right, I'm moving on to Kathy. If you can figure out your microphone, Morris, then let us know. Kathy, go ahead.
Can that be reopened? What was the answer on reopening it? I just didn't get around to voting.
I certainly can.
All right, so and are we done with? There's Morris.
So I was able to unmute. When the poll went up, I was crossing into Arizona and lost connectivity with the Zoom call, not with the regional trail. And I would have voted B. Although I do think the word unacceptable does have, is imprecise, and maybe a different word there could be used. But I would have voted for B. So.
All right. Well, we're reopening the poll.
I don't know if that vote can be added in.
Yeah, we're reopening, I think. Have you figured out how to do that, Brian?
Yeah, I can do that.
All right. So one more time, given what you've heard, maybe vote again for A or B.
Oh, wait, is it popping up again?
No. Wait, I'm going to close this down. Go ahead. You try it again. Yep.
Relaunch poll. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Okay, it's open again.
So everybody will need to revote because it doesn't.
Yeah, hold on, pause for just a second. Adele, do you need to say something before we vote?
Well, while we were talking, and Morris mentioned a different word. I mean, maybe this makes no difference, but what about negative instead of unacceptable? Because unacceptable could be any degree of negative. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too picky.
Well, I would just, not to insert myself in this discussion too much, but I think what Norman was kind of getting at was the notion of cumulative impact. There might be sort of an individual impact that we might think is acceptable, but there may be a cumulative impact that we need to consider as well. So I think recognizing the cumulative impacts. Pat mentioned direct impacts and indirect impacts.
Okay. Well, looks like it's still favoring the original language now, just given the discussion. And
I think it's pretty split, but I think we understand where the splits are in the conversation.
All right, Adela, one more comment before we go. That's the end of the C's. Okay.
Well, and that was my comment. I thought that we had provided an additional suggested item for C.
Okay. Let's see. Which one do you think?
Well, we had suggested adding another one that said to monitor complaints and incidents and then adjust management strategies as needed, or even just monitor complaints and incidents.
Let's see.
Or maybe that belonged in D, I'm not sure. Anyway, that was just an additional thought.
Okay. I'm just looking through the comments to see that. I don't see it. Can you put that in the chat for now, Adela, and we can
Yeah.
figure out what to do with that?
Yeah.
Thanks. All right.